everybody. This is the third podcast of the Better Marketing series. An absolute privilege to welcome Sir Martin Sorrell today. And as you know, our theme here is always better marketing. But as we approach the end of an astonishing year, who better to ask how he's seen things and how he's felt? But most importantly, welcome, Martin. How are you?
I'm very well, David. I'm delighted to be giving you this Christmas and Hanukkah message. We should get Hanukkah in there as well. I mean, a terrible thing to say because obviously, you were saying your mum thinks this is as bad as the war, and she's right because this has been a war, a silent war, and it's been a shocking year. 1.6 million people dying from COVID, and I would probably believe the statistics underestimate the COVID stress and strain. But having said that, I must say, David, from a personal point of view, I feel much better physically and probably mentally from not having to get into hotel rooms at 11 o'clock at night and take conference calls at 4 in the morning and rushing around like a blue-ass fly.
Have you missed travel, Martin? Because your travel schedule was legendary and you've probably got more air miles than anybody in the world.
The simple answer is no, and I think my habits will change. I think, I've already started to book some stuff for next year. I'm going to go to Singapore around March, April, and instead of going for a couple of days, I'll be in Singapore and then Asia for longer. So I'm going to do fewer trips, David, but longer duration. Strange thought maybe, but I think companies in a very odd way have become better run through COVID. I think management, particularly big companies, management has been given more room to maneuver and sort of responsibilities being pushed down because, dare I say it, the centre can't interfere as much as it did perhaps in normal times. So people have been left, A, to get on with it, and B, given more room to flex their muscles, or if I can put it that way. So I think actually, in a weird and perverse way, it's been good because I think that there's been more sort of decentralization, if you like, of responsibility. When you move to working from home and you're trying to get hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands or thousands of people into that space, you delegate authority much more effectively, and that's one thing. And the other thing I think is it's brought teams. I only speak for S4, which is only 3,200 people at the moment, but the 8 people that run it, based in Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Denver, and Scottsdale, meet every day, and our management approach is much more unified and much more flexible.
That's interesting. I mean, it is a theme I've heard elsewhere, actually, and particularly the notion that through the difficulty of working, new ways of working have emerged. And obviously, the global empire that you built depended on people moving around the world, and it wasn't necessarily long on collaboration. But how have you found new ways of working and establishing new rhythms? And can you expand a little bit on how your team have done that too?
We are digital natives, or we are digital first. It's not even second nature to us. And working from home and flexibility and agility, if I can put it that way, was bread and butter for us. Working from home and embedding our people in clients or working in-house has been, again, bread and butter for us. It's been first nature to us. So moving into a COVID working from home environment was seamless, literally seamless, and extremely easy. And our people are younger. The average age of the 2,600 content people is around 32. The average age of the 600 or so data and analytics and media people is about 27, 28. So their mentality has been, I think, quite different. And this was not a big change for them, or any change for them. The other things that, working from home is something they were used to. 24/7 working was something they were used to. Dispersed living was something that they were becoming more interested in. Flexible commuting was something they were calling for. Being in the offices 2 or 3, 4 days a week rather than 5 days a week was something they wanted. So the net of all this, David, is that all I think COVID has done is not created new trends. It's just accelerated the things that we knew there. You know, did we think, you know, San Francisco, was that a congested city? Was it having problems, homelessness and everything else and cost that we knew about before? That was just exacerbated by what we saw in COVID-19. So my view is that these are permanent changes. We've had very few cases of infection and disease in the firm, probably each week. I write to the firm, to everybody in the firm every weekend, and I catalogue how many cases we got directly. The direct cases of infection and disease are few, but obviously it's affected parents, it's affected families, and that's been the biggest problem, mental health problems. Now, our people tend to have limited resources at home. They may live on their own, live with their parents, live singly, live as couples, live as married couples, live with children, whatever, and there has been a resource issue, work-life balance issue. But I think on balance, David, we're in a better position, dare I say it, today than we were 6 or 9 months ago. I think our people have adjusted, as I said, because it was first nature to them anyway, very well. It's been, a demanding experience, but it's really energized us, I think, to an even greater degree. So we go into 21, and I'm very bullish about 21. I mean, we'll get into that, but so I think 20 has been an exhausting year, a demanding year. If I go back to those last 2 weeks of March or the beginning of April, which were the depths of COVID, that's when our revenue growth, and we continue to grow every month organically, like for like. April was the nadir, I guess they call it, 3% growth. But when I think back to that and where we are now, I think we've done extremely well.
So I think it sounds from what you're saying, Martin, that you're just going to be continuing to work this way, and your building back better is probably a bit more of the same. For others, what sort of changes do you think these shifts are going to bring? Because obviously we've got tech acceleration, Black Lives Matter, and the first ever tweet of what happened there was appalling, but that seems to me to have accelerated diversity and inclusion as well. What are you seeing? What are you thinking?
Yes, I mean on DE and I, we as a firm are 40% people of color. We have very, very strong Hispanic and Asian representation. Our black population, if I can put it that way, is around 5 or 6%. But as I say, we're 40% people of color. On the black population side, what we've committed to, and I think this is what everybody should do, is to reflecting the representation, the racial representation and gender. Gender is 50-50. So, but on the racial representation, the communities in which we work in represent. So, for example, in the United States or North and South America, which is 70% of our revenues, we're in New York. Let's take North America, New York or United States. We're New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Mountain View, Seattle. In California, black population is probably about 3, 4, 5%, and we would be representative if that's the standard. In New York, it's 25%, and we're not. The country is 13, and we're probably trending up now because our black recruitment has intensified since Black Lives Matters, and we put a lot of effort behind it. And then we've done this Black Fellows program. So it mirrors what we did at WPP. That was for much more broadly based. But what we've done we're recruiting our first Black Fellows. So we've gone to the high schools for internships because black representation in universities doesn't mirror the community. So we've gone to the high schools and to the black universities, and we're recruiting fellows for a 4-year program. So it'll be 2 years on the content side, 2 years on the data and analytics and digital media side, and maybe a couple of years within those 4 years at the parent, at S4. So there's that. Obviously, we've upped our recruitment program, we've upped our education program. So we've done a lot in the area. But I have to say, David, that I think we over egg our industry, and clients generally over egg this area, in the sense that if we just simply put it, focus on the long term, and I really do believe that this is the answer to it. If you take a long term view, you will embrace every stakeholder that you work with. So, I'm an admirer of Schwab and the World Economic Forum and stakeholder theory, and I'm not so sure about great resets, but that theory is great. But as John Brown said in 1997 at Stanford Business School, if you're in business for the long term, you'll do everything in the interests of every stakeholder that you have. You will invest in your people. You will
Yeah.
invest in the environment, because you will be a better company. And by the way, a more profitable company. I mean, in a way, this is a modification of Friedman's theory around profitability. I agree with Friedman that companies are the business roundtable thing, and let me be very direct about it. I thought, where have we been living, right? I mean, or NASDAQ saying you've got to have one female and one diverse director. I mean, those are low hurdles, or that's like limbo dancing with the bar, above your head. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't push you to any degree. So I think long term focus on the long term is critically important, and everything else falls into place. So we're doing a lot on DE&I, a lot on purpose. It's not virtue signaling. This is fundamental. This is not 1968. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy being assassinated. I think George Floyd and all the other terrible murders, whatever, around it have really focused people's attention. And the other thing I want to say is this, David. I've noticed on the procurement side a very, very significant change. I'll give you one specific example. We pitched, it was for one of the tech platforms, something that we won, so I quote it liberally. 40% of the grade, David, 40% was on the diversity of the team. So if you didn't have a diverse team, it means you didn't get to first base, let
Yeah.
alone hit a home run. So what's happening? And I remember Ken Fraser of Merck at a business council meeting saying recruitment was one thing, but what he really thought the focus should be on was on procurement. And I think what we're seeing, particularly in relation to Black Lives Matters and the DE&I issue, is that procurement is laying down criteria that mean that if you want to stay in business or if you want to be successful, you have to comply. So I think
Yep.
this is all to the right, and I think we are seeing fundamental changes now. And it was I referenced 1968, and we had similar incidents or similar concerns then, but things really didn't change. So I think this is a meaningful difference. And with the change in the US administration, I think, just one story. President Trump at one stage said that companies that were doing diversity training would be excluded or discharged from government work. And my head of recruitment talent globally, who's based in California, said to me, what do we do about our diversity programs? I said, just carry on, carry on
Yeah.
regardless. But I think the new administration may not change in some ways, but I think in this area, they will be quite aggressive and supportive of the sort of things that we're talking about. So on that side, I think there is very, very significant change.
Which is fantastic to see. And as always, what you're showing is actions speak louder than targets. And actually, it's the doing of it rather than the setting of random targets.
And virtue signaling, David. I mean, let's be blunt about it. There was a lot of stuff around April, May. If you shut out the sound, the ads looked exactly the same.
Oh,
And I don't think that not much of it, some of it was meaningfully different. And I think the money could have been invested elsewhere. I mean, we did see a switch in April and May out of traditional and into digital because it was more flexible. I mean, I want to get this over as well. I think traditional media, who are under the gun anyway, really missed a trick. And I know what I'm saying would be revolutionary, but let me be very direct about it. I'm aware of clients that had heavy bookings with free-to-air TV stations who had penalties, who said, even though it was force majeure or material adverse change, really a MAC, which the pandemic was, they weren't prepared to release them from the penalties. That will cost free-to-air in the future, in my view, to a very significant degree. It will force greater flexibility in pricing and
Yeah.
margin from them, and that was that was like Canute and the waves. I mean, if I put it very strongly, that was a terrible mistake. It was an
Yeah.
opportunity for the traditional media to demonstrate, particularly TV, to demonstrate understanding, flexibility, and you now have Procter, saying they're going to go direct, and Procter saying, we're not going to be subject to the inflexibility of the upfronts, and significant change. So there's some fundamental things happening as a result of COVID, which were in the wind anyway. I mean, this is COVID accelerating it. And I think traditional media missed a trick because I think they had the opportunity to demonstrate in the teeth of the pandemic a real understanding. And digital, because it appears to be more effective. We can debate,
Yeah.
the opacity, but it appears to be more effective and it's cheaper in absolute cost. So I think that was more attractive at the time.
Yeah, I mean, two or three things I'd love to pick up on there, but let me pounce on one, which is this. What's been interesting to observe is the virtue signaling is now being called out by the people that work in companies, and actually
Yes.
kind of enabled by the fact that they can do that digitally. They don't have to sit in a meeting and go, that ad that says that we're doing all these wonderful things is not right because. But that is also a kind of powerful trend. Have you seen that? Are you picking up on that?
Younger people have very, very firm views. Maybe those views will become more flexible, let me put it like that, over time, but they have very firm views. And a lot of what we do is conditioned on what our people are prepared to do. I mean, if I compare my experience to WPP, at WPP, I think it was more controlled, if you like. Here it is much more democratic. I mean, it's not just consumers that are expressing their preferences; it's your people. And I don't want to go into the specific cases, but there are specific cases where our people basically said, we don't want to work on that, and and went further. We're not going to work on that, and so you have to be much more responsive and understanding of what people want, and I think it's not just I think that is generally the case, and that's not to
Yeah.
say that when I graduated from B school in '68, we weren't socially aware. I was regarded at Harvard Business School as being a communist, but it's not that. I had a classmate from Birmingham, Alabama, whose name was Still Hunter. Can you believe that? And Still was about the right of Attila the Hun, and but no, I think we were socially aware and socially conscious, but I think these generations are much more so. So yes, you're right. It is conditioned more. There is much more democratic thinking inside the firm about who you're going to work for, and they do condition us very significantly.
Yeah. And then just to not miss the point, I do think your free to air point is well made, but it's another great example of short term thinking. Back in March, April,
Well,
a lot of people had short term panic. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I can think of one client, which is one of the biggest digital advertisers. And the irony about digital companies is they use traditional media extensively. Google, for example, must be one of the biggest spenders in the world, and their budgets, as I remember it, were 50-50 traditional and online. But one of the biggest digital spenders, not Google, one of the biggest digital spenders, was confronted by, I'll be very direct about ITV, and was told they'd have to pay penalties. I can assure you they will never go back to where they were, or they won't go back to where they were for a very long period of time. And I think, it was a unique circumstance. Again, it was like war, but a silent war. And I think the traditional media should have been more responsive. And to the point, I mean, COVID-19 has accelerated change at three levels: consumer, online education, online financial services, online healthcare, in-home games and entertainment. 30% of US households, order online or necessities for the first time. At a media level, Rupert Murdoch closes 100 titles plus in Australia. The ACCC then starts to, harangue Google. I think they've come to an agreement just recently. You see traditional outdoor under heavy pressure. So the free to air, Disney now talking about 87 million subscribers on Disney Plus with no advertising, and Netflix still going like gangbusters. I think Netflix will have to. My view is that Netflix will come out with Reed Hastings will probably fight this to his dying day, but with this multi-layered, you have a service that is subsidized by advertising. If you don't want advertising, you pay more. Just like Discovery has done with its new Discovery Plus service. So you had all those changes. They were accelerated. And the third area, so you have consumer, media. The third area is enterprise. So the people we're talking to on this call, where those companies that were not willing or were conservative about digital transformation, COVID-19 blew the model up. I mean, David, look, clients, GDP growth 2, 3 or 4% since 2010. Very little inflation, very little pricing power, push down the cost, buy back a bit of stock, and you have EPS growth of 0 to 5, 5 to 10%. That's not bad. Pas mal, as the French would say.
Yeah.
That's okay. COVID-19 blew a hole in that, and what we are seeing is change agents inside companies being given a lot more oxygen during COVID, and in my view, after COVID than before. So revolutionary change on the digital side. You know the banking industry very well. The banking industry protecting its old IT systems or old infrastructure because they wouldn't take the write down. I think that's going to go, and I think the pressure from the fintech platforms, the digital competitors, is going to be so huge, and this applies to every category. It's not just financial. So huge that they will be forced for their own good. Again, come back to long-term thinking. Forced for their own good to change. So what we see, BMW Mini, Mondelez, in our case, are two big examples where there's been very significant changes being implemented or planned to be implemented. The common refrain, David, is my 2024 plan is going to be implemented in 2021.
Yeah. But I also think, the rise of some middleware solutions have brought the lie to some of these major digital transformations of the old infrastructure, and it's being blown up. So remarkable to see. And I think we've covered remarkable amount of ground here as usual, but to kind of bring this back to, what do you think this means as marketing looks at building back better and doing better marketing? I think you've just talked about the trends. What do you think the key actions are? What do people need to think about to
Well,
start fast?
I think there are three things, and to be very specific, the importance of first-party data, because of Google's decision around third-party cookies, because of Apple's changes in their hardware, you have to. You have no choice now. I mean, I think Google's decision drove a lot of irritation. I can remember pre-COVID, you know, one of the big airlines, one of the big hospitality companies that were developing third-party sources and cookies around third-party sources expressed tremendous frustration directly to me and said, you know, we can't do that anymore. We're being forced back to our first-party data sources. But you have to. You know, number one priority, I think, is to integrate. You know, this is self-interest in our data and analytics practice going through the roof. Because simple stuff, not brain surgery. You don't have to be an Einstein. This is just getting data to talk to one another, getting the systems all organized, the lakes sort of harmonized, if you like. So that's number one. The second thing, which is at a slightly more sort of subjective and philosophical level, is you have. My view is the marketeers, a strange thing coming from me, I guess, given Sarch's WPP and S4, you have to take back control. I mean, you cannot, in a 24/7 environment where things are coming at you at warp speed, you know, forget about COVID. Put that to one side for me if you possibly can. Managing a brand when digital is now more than 50% of spend and will be 70% by 2024, according to our projections and others' projections, you cannot afford not to have control. So outsourcing, you know, whether it's an outsourcing model, an embedded model, where we embed, like we have 100 people at Mountain View that sit on Google's shoulder, if you like, across the freeway from the Googleplex, or we do an in-housing model. And whatever you hear from the agencies, and I look at the WFA statistics, in-housing is top of mind. What should we do in-house that we have more control over? You have to have control. This is like Brussels. This is like, we'll see what the weekend brings. But it looks and smells and feels like no deal. We'll see whether they give us a last-minute solution. But by the way, I have to get this in. If any of us had taken a decision 4 years ago and not implemented it, by now we would be dead. I mean, we would have been fired years ago. It's awful. It's awful. I mean, just to be violent about it, the government played with people's lives around COVID-19. I'm 75. I'm vulnerable technically, and I think I was one of those people that could have been sacrificed. Some people might say that was a good thing, but I was somebody at risk. They played with people's lives on COVID. They are now playing with people's economic lives. I really feel very strong about it. I'm extremely annoyed about it, actually, because I think, people argue, well, it's a skinny deal if we got it. It's emblematic. So anyway, I just, having got that off my chest, take back control. Take back control. Everybody on this call that's responsible for a product, a brand, a corporate brand, or whatever, you have to have more. And we can work with you, outsource, embedded, in-source, but you have to do it. And the agency holdcos have a vested interest. I ran one, I know. Have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. And then the final thing, which is even more esoteric, is agility. I mean, this is apple pie and motherhood, but what COVID-19 has taught you, I think, in spades, is you have to be so flexible. I mean, Paul Polman used to speak very eloquently about a VUCA world, volatility and uncertainty, etc. But you have to turn on the sixpence. And the thing that kills the organizations, is the internal stuff. So aligning everybody and getting them to move in the same direction is critically important. And agility, I mean, everybody I talk to since we started S4, CMOs, CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, chief sales officers, whatever it is, all bang on about this, particularly in analog companies. And you have to, it's easy to say, I know. So those three things: first party data, crucial. Use that for content and distribution. Secondly, and by the way, Netflix has it the right way.
Yeah.
And Mark Pritchard, I think at Procter, is really doing some interesting things around 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion consumer profiles, looking at more flexibility, going direct on TV, breaking the upfront model, all these things about some interesting change. But Netflix, to me, is still, the most interesting model. Personalization at scale, creative that is adaptable and flexible and agile, looking at the data as it's pumped out, looking at the responses, the consumer responses, trying to twig the different consumer responses are, and responding accordingly by changing the creative.
Yeah.
And I think that's critical. So those three things, though: first party data, taking back control, and agility. Those three things.
Fantastic. And if I on the Netflix thing, I mean, the other thing I've observed is hardly a Zoom call, I'm talking social ones here, go by without somebody advocating for them and saying, have you seen such and such? So they've got the whole thing. Not only have they with the data, they've got brand preference and advocacy going for them as well.
Yeah, the only thing they have to do is to fix their profitability model.
Yes, well, I'm sure they're on that. I'm sure they'll detail. But one other thing to ask you before we get to wrapping. I mean, how, when I read the campaign article, which very well written, so well done, Gideon Spanier, and great for you to open up like that. I mean, interesting to see you talking about your work-life balance, or can I be bold and say your historic lack of it?
Lack of, yes.
How have you coped? And I know you're not one for regrets necessarily, but if you could kind of look back and change things, knowing what you know now, would you have looked at a different work-life balance?
Listen, it's so difficult. I mean, it depends on how you're made, I guess, or how you're how develop over time. I mean, my mother did say that going to Harvard Business School was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Um, uh, it's terribly difficult. I mean, there are very few people that I know. Shelley Lazarus. I think women are better at it than men. Terrible thing
Yeah,
for me to say, but I think, or maybe not so terrible. I think they're better at it than men. They allocate, not all women obviously, but they allocate their time and their EQs. I think in account management in our industry, women are better than men because their EQs are better than male EQs, and their IQs are often better as well. But Shelley Lazarus is a good example. She managed to balance things. All ends up. So it is possible. It depends on your determination to do it. And maybe the truth of the matter is, David, that the way I was made, or the way that I was, in the furnace, the steel was made. I was made differently. I was
yeah,
wired differently. So maybe, do I regret it? Well, at times I do, to be honest, but at times I don't. I placed, so those three circles I refer to that George Cabot Lodge, if you put it in your essay at HBS, your case study essay, you got an A. I got an A
yeah,
minus, but I got an A, and I put it in, right? And it was about three circles: family, career, society, and getting the intersection. And sometimes I do regret that I placed career first and family second. The society stuff, I think, has tended to come. I have a small foundation. We just made some more grants, and you get great satisfaction out of it. I mean, not on the scale of others, but we get satisfaction out of it. But maybe at some point in time, you regret that you put career first rather than family. And there are some times where, frankly, you say, no, I did the right thing. So, but you can't put the toothpaste back into the tube, and I do think it's about the wiring, and the wiring is how you're conditioned and how you grew up, and it's. But sometimes some regrets, David.
But I did well. Very eloquently said, and a great call out for the wonderful Shelley Lazarus, who struck me as having, that perfect balance of IQ, EQ, and I'm grateful to AJ Banger, who's got that thing of DQ, which is
Yeah,
decency quotient as well. So, good human being with great empathy, with good
yeah,
balance, and it made it easier. No wonder she built such a great network, actually.
yes, yeah, and she was admired and respected for that. Now, just to sort of balance it or imbalance it, Charlotte Beer's totally different.
Yeah.
I'm sure kill me for saying this. Attention span of a gnat, but 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 in her own way, probably very different to Shelley, but in her own way, very very successful. I mean,
Yeah.
when she went to Ogilvy, people said to me, "How could you put this woman who has no international experience, who sold her agency to the French, in charge of Ogilvy?" And she did a great job. And then
She did
Shelley
indeed.
took over.
Yeah.
Um, that was in the 90s. So
Yeah.
it is. Can I put it this way? Horses for courses, but but Charlotte, was very different, but had her own style. Um, not as balanced as, dare I say it, not as balanced as Shelley. Shelley was I'm sure Shelley, you know, maybe at times she thought it wasn't perfectly balanced, but from my perspective, she balanced it perfectly. I think that balance of the three things is really important.
Wonderful. All right, Martin, well, what a privilege to speak to you, and happy holidays, as we must politically correctly say, and Hanukkah
Hey,
and
I'm gonna.
Christmas.
uh,
But one last question. I mean, if you hopefully we'll get the opportunity to have you watch a WFA Better Marketing podcast. Who would you like to watch? Who would you like to see doing this?
well, actually, I saw Elon Musk immediately came to mind. I mean, if I was trying to interview somebody, and he was on the Wall Street Journal CEO's, and I couldn't get to listen to it. He was on it a few days ago, being interviewed by WSJ, a reporter. But beyond that, I mean, the other people, and this is self-serving. I think Mark Pritchard is really doing some interesting things at Procter,
Yep.
and I've said to him, he has the Netflix model in mind, so I think it's really interesting. And then just two very parochial people, in my experience, Jens Thiemer at BMW, I think is interesting.
Yep.
He came from Mercedes Benz. He was the CMO at Mercedes Benz, and then left to go to BMW. And then the other one is John Halverson at Mondelez. Who has we've these are people who've shown faith in us, if you like. But John Halverson at Mondelez, with his content, because we're doing global website and tech infrastructure and global content, TVC content, and we're doing all digital outside of Europe, so Americas and Asia Pacific. So I think they're interesting because I think they're change agents.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we will look forward to talking to change agents, but absolute privilege, as I say, and I look forward to seeing you again soon, Martin. And to everybody else, happy holidays, happy Christmas, and we'll be back in January when I'll be talking to Raja Rajamannar as an ex-president to the current president about what 2021 is going to hold for the marketing industry. Thank you so much, everybody.